Everybody's talking about AI. Governments are not short on interest in AI. And so we're going to talk about what cities are focused on in terms of choke points, where pilots actually fail, where pilots can scale, and thinking about how AI integrated across full ecosystems.
Please join me in welcoming our esteemed panelists. On our panel today, we have April Ray, the president and CEO of Comto, a trailblazing leader in transportation. We have John Matelski, the Chief Information Officer at the National Association of Counties and nationally recognized voice in digital government. We have Matt Fraser, the former Chief Technology Officer of New York City, who led digital expansion and technology innovation for the largest city in the US. And finally, we have Dartanion Swift-William, the Chief Data Officer for the City of Baltimore, where he is transforming how data modernizes government and delivers critical services. And moderating this discussion, please help me in welcoming Leigh-Ann Buchanan, the President and CEO of the Miami-Dade Innovation Authority.
Everybody's talking about AI. Governments are not short on interest in AI. When you look at recent global studies, they show that 60 to 65%, I'd probably say this is close to 75% of local government organizations are interested in strategically positioning AI to amplify and optimize outcomes, but less than 25% have actually integrated it, and less than 15% have integrated generative AI. So this gap really matters because AI integration into government is not theoretical, it's really practical. It's actually absolutely essential. And so we're going to talk about what cities are focused on in terms of choke points, where pilots actually fail, where pilots can scale, and thinking about how AI can be integrated across full ecosystems. So when we think about some of the choke points or some of the areas where things stall, most governments now collect many indicators of failure. You think about 311 data, we think about sensors, operational dashboards, all types of performance metrics. But this suggests that there's lots of data, lots of opportunity, but oftentimes the ability to act on the insights that are surfaced is not realized. So when something breaks in a city, for example, a flooded street, a stalled transit line, a service outage, early warning signals often exist, but where do these decisions stall? When is information needed? What information is ready available but unable to be deployed to the right decision makers? Let's talk for a moment about where AI can be helpful and where information stalls. I will leave it up to all of you to decide who's going to go first.
I'll jump in real quick. So, as we look at counties and what we do to help support our citizens, our residents, I think the key really is ensuring, data access and quality. People talk all the time about AI, and that's great. But then when I actually go in and have discussions with some of our counties, and it's not all about size or anything either. It really doesn't matter if it's large, medium, or small. Everyone's a different place on their journey. The biggest challenge is some of them don't even have data governance or data policies. So why would you create an AI policy without having good data policies and that kind of thing too? So I think that's the primary choke point I would suggest, at least from a county and municipality perspective, is ensuring that you've got those quality gaps fixed and that you're really focused on the data before you add the AI layer. And I don't want to steal everyone's thunder, so the only other thing I'll say, which is weak governance and ethics frameworks also, I think are major choke points. And having the right people at the table to help facilitate making those not choke points and actually making them opportunities to build trust and transparency, I think are key.
I want to go to Matt, and Matt, I see you're about to jump in, but John says it's about access, quality, but then also thinking about what the governing frameworks are. As the former CTO of New York, it's a lot of data. There's probably a lot of fragmentation. Do departments talk to each other? Are they using the same data sets? Talk to us about the implementation lens that you bring to thinking about removing some of the bottlenecks.
First and foremost, good morning, everyone. All right, so we're going to do this really quick. I apologize. So when I say good morning, I mean it. Everybody here is alive. Hopefully the people you loved also woke up this morning. Yeah. So when I say good morning, I mean good morning. So let's try one more time. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
All right, that feels better. So when I look at what this means for a city like New York, one of the big things that we have to focus on first is what's the business use case. So a lot of times what happens, like you look at a city like New York, you have over 8 million people, you have over 1 million buildings, you have tons of sensors, tons of data. And what happened over time is that every agency that represents New York has built an identity around what that agency is. And that data that they hold, there's a strong sense of this is my data, I can't share it with you, so on and so forth. And then when we identify some of the business use cases of the outcomes that we're trying to affect, and you talk to the leaders that run those agencies, it makes it much easier to talk about what data sharing agreements look like. A very good example I'll give you is like childcare. Like something very basic, but how many agencies have information about when a child is born, the age that they get to, and how many agencies are responsible in the childcare fulfillment process? In New York City, when you apply for a basic service like childcare, it goes to one of 3 different agencies. Those 3 different agencies go through their own manual review process, and it used to be at least 30 to 45 days before you would get a message back in mail about your eligibility determination. And if you fail to meet the qualifications for one of the programs, you had to reapply by mail for something else. So when we brought those 3 agencies into a room and we talked about sharing your information in real time, creating a system so that we can make decisions based on that data and get people access to that benefit as fast as possible, that certainly changed the speed at which they were working together. And now because of stuff like that as a foundation, when we look at things like AI, by pooling the information from those agencies, we now have a cool capability to start looking at people that need public benefits, like the credit card industry looks at potential candidates for companies. So imagine being a mother who has a kid. We get a notification that we know because of your prior applications for either public housing or financial benefit, we know that you are below the poverty line. You already have 2 kids, now you have another. Proactively being able to serve you with benefits before you ask is a place where AI is emerging these days within New York City. So I think for us, the business use case is always the thing that drives the mission. And once you can get people behind the use case, everything else will go.
I want to go to April really quickly, but let me contextualize something because I want April, you to talk a little bit about how Matt just framed this. There's a business use case, but sometimes there's a disconnection between the business use case and the end user. The end of the day, the purpose of cities is to improve quality of life for residents. We optimize and we look at AI and other types of technology to make sure that the resident experience is one that is positive, that their needs are served, and they can really access the resources that cities have. So I know you're going to jump in, but I'd love for you also to speak to, because you do represent so many different jurisdictions, how are jurisdictions kind of toting the line between articulating the business use case, but understanding that there is an end user and thinking through an experience design lens, how they eliminate these data fiefdoms, if you will, that exist cross-departmentally, and think about really creating harmonization in how the different systems are talking to each other.
Yeah, you framed it perfectly. And I mean, regardless of what industry we represent, we're all in the people business, right? And so across our jurisdictions and in the transportation industry, we really find that decisions are stalling at the handoff. So data is existing, but the authority and trust is not there. So cities that are acting earlier, when they bring together frontline operators and community voices and leadership, when they all share the same real-time picture, they're empowered to move before something becomes a crisis. And so at COMTO, we are a convener and a collaborator trying to bridge the gap between the public and the private sector and the community voices. And it's not easy, because when it comes to practical decision-making, there needs to be frameworks that can be stress tested. And so in some of the smaller and rural communities we're working with, there's a capacity issue. I mean, I call some of these folks superheroes because they've got 13 jobs and they're stressed, but they really care a lot about the communities that they represent. So once agencies can align roles and share early warning indicators, then response times have improved before emergencies escalate. But it really does take some strategic planning, coordination, and really sometimes you need organizations and associations who have been embedded in the community for a long time to help bridge the gap, create the trust, so that when an emergency arises, everybody can come together and really move on one accord.
Dartanion, you know I'm coming to you. And what I appreciate about what you said, April, is that you are moving the conversation from strict implementation in terms of like the technical aspects to thinking about how the hierarchy of decision-making and authority flows. The work that MDIA does as a public innovation authority is we serve as a platform for government leaders to accelerate how they pilot and procure emerging technologies. And one of the biggest insights that I've seen is, yes, there is the interoperability question when you're looking at a particular solution, but there's always this layer, what I like to call the psychological layer, or the power layer of, can I, as a implementer, do I have the authority to do this? Am I gonna rock the boat? Is this gonna be risky? So Dartanion, what I'd love for you to talk about, generally answering the question, but also talk to us about what are some of the frameworks that you are actually seeing in practice to help provide authority to people that need to make decisions, to make sure all of the stakeholders are considered, and maybe some that don't need to be at the table are removed from the equation so that you can actually implement more effectively.
It's a really good question. And for added context, local governments are like 30 big companies enrolled into one. And so when you think about a city service and all of the touch points and all of the data and systems and people that are involved, trust is a big part of that. And so when I'll give one example of, let's just say we're solving illegal dumping or responding to that. That involves about 6 agencies within the city, and it involves their data. And so if you want to do a lightweight pilot and say, we can automate a response to illegal dumping, but we need your data, then that creates a lot of questions and thrash and concern. And so there are a couple of ways to address that. One is you start with framing the problem and telling the story around how we can optimize this operation. There is a psychological bit because you need to frame it in a way that doesn't suggest that someone's not doing their job effectively. You can frame it in a way that speaks to an opportunity to bring these operations together and realize stronger outcomes for the people that we serve. And so an example of that would be the housing department has a role in this through code enforcement. Public Works has a role in this through cleanup. Community engagement has a role in this. The Environmental Control Board has a role in this through issuing citations, et cetera, et cetera. We have been successful at starting a small pilot for this work to demonstrate what it looks like. Sometimes people need to see it in action because it feels very abstract. And so an example of what that looked like was bringing in CTV. Oh God, now I'm starting to sound technical. So in areas where we have dumping hotspots, we have cameras, right? But we don't make good use of the cameras because someone has to go in and surveil afterwards, so it's reactive. But if you can see the event happen, and if you could detect it through a smart model, then you can make the smart decisions to deploy resources in a proactive fashion. Now the resident doesn't have to report it. And so we had to get clearance from IT to get access to the systems. We had to give them, we had to ensure that we're gonna make responsible use of the imagery to not identify people. And then we had to build confidence that the model will actually detect dumping events to trigger workflows to coordinate a response or an investigation. So it was almost selling the idea to our internal stakeholders to get the right buy-in.
So this is the perfect segue because you talked about a pilot. And when we look at many of the instances of AI experimentation in local government, it stalls at the pilot level. So they rarely move from testing, proof of value, proof of concept into full-scale integration across the ecosystem into everyday operations. And so I want to talk about where that gap exists. At MDIA, we have launched 19 pilots across multiple departments in less than 3 years. And what we've been able to see is that even though we've been able to create a 67% reduction in time to pilot, it used to take 18 months, we can get a pilot started in 6 months or less through using pilot-based open innovation challenges. Ultimately, what is missing is the appropriate layer for continuously adopting new technology. We call that the digital integration layer. Vertical integration happens much more quickly in the private sector, but when it gets to the public sector, the lack of governance procedures, the lack of more agile procurement strategies, the lack of policy that can move from pilot into full-scale procurement, these are the things that prevent really cool technologies, particularly those that are AI-based, from actually scaling. So whoever wants to take the question, I would love for you to start talking about where have you seen AI actually move beyond pilot to dependable everyday systems? What institutional changes were necessary for that to happen? And then what institutional roadblocks continue to prevent AI from scaling?
I'd like to just quickly say, in some of the communities that we're working with that are under-resourced, it's all about approach. Sometimes it's reactive instead of it being full-scale integrated, and that starts at the leadership level. So the approach to looking at AI can't just be to put a Band-Aid on one issue or to solve one problem, but it really needs to be looked at as something that can help with predictive support, analysis, and in that way, it can be fully integrated into the operations instead of just being put on top of something as a specific fix for a specific issue that really doesn't allow everyone within an organization or an operation to be a part of the solution. So I think approach is the first start.
So the approach in some instances is so siloed. And so the silos do not allow for even the insights and the learnings to deploy across the system. I saw you were jumping in here, John.
Yeah, no, what we're seeing really at the county level is those counties that are succeeding have a clear service-driven use case, strong leadership, and cross-departmental or cross-agency alignment. And you want to make sure that you're starting small and then scaling within the capabilities that you have. Because I think what we're finding is the counties aren't lacking interest, but they're probably lacking maybe infrastructure, capacity, or guardrails that are hindering the execution. The only other thing I'll add to that, it was interesting, I was out doing an AI forum out on the West Coast, and Utah County Commissioner Amelia Powers Gardner was saying, it's really great to go after those things that you want to implement that are going to have the biggest impact on the most amount of your residents and constituents. Having said that, if you don't have someone in your organization driving that, forget about it. It may have the most impact, but if you don't have a sponsor and someone that's carrying it throughout the organization, it is going to fail, irrespective of the other resources that you can throw into it. So having that commitment and being able to push those things across your organization, across the finish line, are really key.
This idea of sponsorship is really interesting, and then Matt, we'll go to you because I see you're ready to jump in. I think that we talk about sponsorship and it's often framed through a singular lens that you need that one champion. What we've done pilots at the port, the airport, solid waste, housing, now emergency management, transportation, is that the sponsorship has to exist at multiple levels. Yes, buy-in at the top. We have an amazing mayor, Daniela Levine Cava at the county, new mayor in the city of Miami, where we're actually located, Mayor Eileen Higgins, who are very forward-thinking about making sure the technology is not an afterthought, that we're looking at how it is embedded into operations. But at multiple levels, we have to have champions. And what we've seen is that while we may have a champion at the departmental level, for example, we'll have a champion at the port, if you've centralized IT and you haven't found the champion in IT, then it creates this tension between one department that wants to implement AI and another department that says, well, our infrastructure is not ready, for example, for computer vision. We don't have edge computing on site, so we can't do object detection with computer vision. So no. How do you resolve those tensions between departments? And then Matt, I just love your general thoughts on how we can actually move these pilots to scale.
So you might hear this theme from me a lot, but I think the mission really matters. So if you want to move something from pilot to general acceptance and general use, it's what are you doing and what are you doing it for? So I think there are spaces where the government moves really fast, depending on what it is that they're doing, and that's mostly in places like public safety. If you're worried about someone dying, you're going to move really fast to make sure that you can prevent that as quick as possible. So when we look at a lot of the AI use cases in New York City and like where a lot of that stuff comes from, you think about over the last decade, we've done things like body cameras, gunshot detection, chem rad sensors, and in real time taking all that information and making real time determinations around where we put people and how we should deploy our police officers. And in the background, we take 10 years worth of crime data, we look at weather, we look at a bunch of other factors, and then we make determinations proactively on where we should place people. Now, that's the public safety use case. When you get into public benefits and other spaces, which may be less mature, it's getting behind a mission and getting behind an outcome that you want to see and getting sponsorship across all levels. I think one of the things that you touched on that's very important is that in places where you have IT centralized and you have the business owners in a separate side of the camp, one of the challenges is if you have IT leaders that are traditional IT leaders that understand tech, but that don't understand the business operation, you're always going to find yourself at this point of contention because it's like, from the tech side, it's like if we innovate too quickly and we don't have the proper footing and something fails, the liability is on me. And on the business side, they're trying to get outcomes that enable success in ways that the business hasn't seen. So they're pushing from the other end of the spectrum. I think collectively having a conversation and a general understanding, if you don't do something today, what's the cost of inaction and how we can leverage technology to make those better. I think in most cases, you'll reason out which pilots make sense to take on and which ones make sense just to put to the side.
I want to go to Dartanion next, but what's really important about what you said is that when it comes to AI, yes, it can be a North Star, but a North Star has to have OKRs. We need to think about how do you operationalize that North Star? And when we do that, what often comes up are issues around, they're very practical issues around trust. How do we understand how to build our trust frameworks in particular systems? What are our guidelines for evaluating particular solutions? Urgency can be great, but one of the tensions that we're often trying to resolve when working with our CITD department in Miami-Dade County is how we can use pilots as a means of understanding where to prioritize infrastructure upgrades. When you have an immediate need, sometimes that can leapfrog it within the roadmap of what infrastructure upgrades are needed. So, Dartanion, I want to come to you to talk a little bit about this idea of trust and liability, because sometimes you do need to think about liability. You are a public entity. There are different rules that apply to how you use data, personally identifiable data, different liabilities that exist that sometimes when startups or more agile companies are trying to understand how to integrate with local government, even the security matrices blow their minds. So how do you resolve that tension between what's coming from the private sector that you want to adopt, but maintaining your standards as a public sector entity?
Oh, definitely. I think it's two things from the start. AI products work really well when the foundations are set. We've seen demos and it's really impressive. And the question always comes up, well, why can't we just do this, right? And the answer to that is there's a data foundation that needs to be in place, but bigger than the data, there's process that needs to be understood and that needs to be contextualized into AI products. An example of that would be, let's say for permitting. In many cities, well, every city provides permitting and development services. And one could say, well, you can put an AI on top of this and it will tell the resident exactly what they need to do. Well, in order for the AI to tell the resident exactly what to do, someone needs to inform the AI of the process. And in order to do that, you need to understand the regulations behind it and the business processes and the handoffs and the workflows, et cetera. if I am going to do the development project, then you need to know what may trigger a floodplain review. You may need to know what can expedite or auto issue or permit, et cetera. So the business process around how things get done and what the handoffs are is critical. The same applies to having a foundational set of quality data that's understood and interpreted by all, including systems, I think is another bit. The third part around avoiding, mitigating potential risk and liabilities associated with systems is understanding sort of the implications around poor decisions being made, and ensuring that you are evaluating the various edge cases and evaluating the impact of an unfortunate decision being acted on. We often consult with counsel on that, both at the mayor's office level as well as within our agencies, so that we are positioning ourselves to on the path for responsible adoption of AI.
I love that you said consult with counsel. In my past life, I was an attorney. I'm a recovering attorney now. So attorneys can often, be roadblocks. They just often say no. One of the things that we have worked really closely with the county attorney's office in Miami-Dade is to understand whether the no is a no or if there's a lack of knowledge of what the implications of the technology are. I'll give you a really clear example, then John, I want to go to you to talk about some of the risks. We have a pilot demonstration agreement, which is the vehicle that authorizes pilots, technology pilots in our county. And one of the provisions was regarding derivative works. And essentially what it said is every single time you use county data, a technology company could never use an instance of their technology that use county data. Well, if you look at LLMs, you're often training. My iPhone just updated. There are new software updates that come out. And so one of the pushbacks that we had, and we had to negotiate, is rewriting the agreement to make sure that we're protecting interest, but we're also meeting the technology of today, how it operates. And there are a lot of blind spots that exist that only surface in practice. They often only surface in pilots and implementation. And so, John, I want to talk to you because counties manage everything from public safety to infrastructure, and any number of issues can create blind spots around technology adoption. As we think about AI, Dartanion mentioned process. If you haven't mapped the process, it's really hard to implement AI effectively. What are some other blind spots that come up when governments are looking to implement AI as a layer on top of service delivery?
Yeah, I think the biggest barriers and the biggest risks that counties have to overcome is really the fact that we do have a lot of data silos. We have a number of legacy systems that are still in place that is just very difficult to layer anything on top of. And then, of course, there's that whole data infrastructure. And I think also capacity is another major constraint, regardless of what size your county is. Most counties do not have dedicated AI teams. They don't have, if they even have an IT department, they're already stretched thin. And we have tons of counties across the nation that IT person might be, that person over in the water utility that just happens to know the most about computers. So I think we really need to focus on what our internal resources are, how we can best leverage them. And then the last thing I'll talk about is, having a sustainable procurement a department, an agency that can understand, and to your earlier point, working with the law department and working, in counties, law departments, procurement, and chief security officers tend to be the biggest barriers. And if we're all working together for the same goal, though, which is the citizen-facing outcomes, I think we can overcome those risks. And again, it's that top to bottom and bottom to top governance that's required, and not just one key leader trying to wave the flag and not getting it as a cultural acceptance through the organization.
One of the things that we've seen in using pilot-based open innovation challenges as a way to get procurement and IT comfortable with trying before they buy, de-risking full-scale awards, is procurement has seen this as a really great vehicle to create efficiencies. It eliminates the potential for our RFP failure in the future when what is promised in technology doesn't actually work in practice. But one of the challenges with pilots, particularly technology pilots, is different departments and different systems have different tolerance levels for failure. April, I want to come to you to talk about transportation. If there's a delay or failure in transportation and mobility, the impacts are probably more severe than perhaps a delay in permitting. People might get annoyed at permitting, but some people can't get to work. And so how are some of the agencies that you interact with focused on managing AI implementation, new technology, but also hedging against the risk of the implications on those systems?
Well, funding is an issue. I'm just going to say it. It's difficult. And even just navigating, large funding streams like federal funding, capacity continues to be an issue. So just echoing my colleague, capacity building support is important and cross-sector connections are really important. And Comto as an organization is trying to help strengthen that coordination so that, we can intervene earlier and reduce cascading impacts on communities and stop a localized issue from becoming a regional shutdown. But I do think that there is a challenge in kind of balancing the safety aspects, the reliability, and the public trust under constant strain. And, hey, we don't think AI should replace judgment, but really it should sharpen it and give operators and leaders better foresight so that human decisions are faster and more informed. So once again, it comes back to approach. But funding is also a challenge, and the cross-sector collaboration and coordination continues to be an issue. So we just have to keep talking about it and keep normalizing it. And I know that it's going to get better because the opportunities are phenomenal.
I have one final question that I will pose to everybody because we're running short on time. But I've been thinking a lot about AI implementing AI in government. One of the things that comes up for me is the large amounts of data that the large language models might be trained on and optimized on is an asset. And a lot of times you'll have, the Anthropics of the world and these large companies that go to local government and say, give us all your data and we will give you great insights so that you can operate more effectively. But that's an exchange. That is a transaction. There is currency that exists in that data that even in the way that it is packaged, you think about transportation data, camera data, that should be something that cities could be monetizing, whether or not it's some type of royalty, whether or not there's a general standard to value how data is delivered to LLMs. I think that cities may be missing out on an opportunity to generate some revenue for the data that they are sharing. So that is one big idea that I have around how we can reimagine the role that government plays in interacting with AI companies. So the question I have for each of you as we close out is governing smarter isn't about technology alone. It's really about the leadership changes, the structural changes, and thinking about what systems need to be adjusted to more effectively implement AI into everyday operations. So what is one change that you think needs to be made?
If I could start with that one, I would say the foundation. If we as local government leaders could position cities to have clean foundational data on city operations, then we would be much better positioned to layer in AI on top of it for insights. If we start with the core set of city services, for example, 311 and work orders, maybe public safety, housing, and probably fiscal, those are core domains that touch everything that we do in cities, and that could serve as an opportunity to jumpstart leveraging AI for accelerated insights on city operations. To your point around partnerships, I think is very smart. Why? Because you cannot get started responsibly at scale without quality data foundations and quality processes. And so an incentive for a potential partner really could be to support your government in accelerating those foundational steps. Hey, we will partner with you to do a computer vision project. We'll partner with you to do a large language model or chatbot project, but we need your help with getting the foundational data in order so that we can do this responsibly at scale and position us all to be successful. I think that that's a novel concept.
So there's a trade-off there. There's an exchange. I love it. Bargaining chips. John.
No, and I'll just, kind of like a quick soundbite adding to what Dartanion just said. It's like technology is rarely the hardest part. It's really the capacity within your organization, the governance, and then the trust. And if you can work on those three things, the data cleanup is, that's a given. But the technology components, I think you're going to find are actually going to be the easiest part. It's the rest of it where you need to get that culture throughout your organization.
I'm going to push you.
Uh-oh.
What's the number one?
Number one.
If you had to choose, Russian roulette, which one's the most important?
I'm going to go with governance.
Okay.
I mean, people would be capacity, but you can have all the capacity. If you don't have governance around it, then you're just going to be all over the place.
April, what's that one thing that needs to change?
Shared accountability. Governing smarter starts with shared accountability for how decisions affect real people in real time.
Amazing. We're going to end with you, Matt.
I'd say organizational alignment. One of the big challenges that I find or that I've seen, like one of the things that you pointed on in terms of having privacy risk, having data risk, and being able to monetize, that requires leadership that comes from very different parts of the organization. So it requires organizational alignment and getting your principals on board. And by principles, it means more than just the principle of the city, it means the principle of the agencies. So when you talk about terms like artificial intelligence, everybody hears AI, but not everybody understands what it means and how it can impact their outcomes. So if you can get organizational alignments, get your principals on board, understand how this type of technology can impact their mission, the money will come, the resources will come, as long as you can deliver the outcomes.
I think, as I try to take in all of what we've talked about, we've hit on a lot. You guys got to give yourselves a round of applause. Let's give them a round of applause. As we transition, and just my reminders, you're going to go back upstairs. We're playing a little bit of musical floors. My personal motto in life is people, purpose, and impact over everything else. And to me, that also encapsulates some of the important themes as you think about integrating AI into government. We can't forget about the people, both the people as the end users, but also the people who are leading these projects and these efforts to implement. But then purpose, to your point, so many points. You need to be clear. Why are you even doing this? How do we make sure that we are focused on efficacy, effectiveness over just checking the box to say we have AI? And then impact matters. And you can't get to impact without thinking about governance. You can't get to impact without thinking about what are the implications of the decision making and what are the implications on all of the departments who might be interacting with this new system. So a lot to think about, a lot to keep discussing. Let's give our panelists a round of applause, and we appreciate you.